Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Women and Girls Foundation's web show, In the Movement. I'm your host, Camila Rivera-Tinsley, and each month we interview incredible people who are working towards creating a more sustainable and equitable future. Our conversations are focused on gender, racial, and environmental justice. And this month, I'm honored to have my guest and my friend, Cara Ciminillo, join us. We will be discussing trying together issues around early child care and how it impacts women, and particularly women of color. Welcome, Cara. I'm so happy to have you join the show.
Thanks, Camilla. I'm so happy to be here.
All right. Why don't you share a bit about your background and what led you to trying together?
I have been at the organization for um, almost 14 years and almost 10 years in this position. And when I came to the organization 14 years ago, at the time I had, let me think about their age, I had a 7-year-old and a 2-year-old, both daughters. And I had a full-time position at the University of Pittsburgh, and I was using childcare, as most people do, because most people are working in order to sustain their families. And honestly, I couldn't have survived those early years without the caregivers that I really relied on. I'll shout out two of them. And that is La Escuelita. My older daughter spent several years there. They actually just celebrated their 25th anniversary. And my younger daughter attended something called the Farm School, which was a home-based childcare program in Morningside, and it was run by someone named Heather Shannon. And really, those two experiences were extensions of my family. So, in order for me to function and for my husband to function, we really had to rely on childcare. Neither one of us, my husband nor I, are from Pittsburgh originally, so we don't have family here locally, and so we really just they really were the extension of who we could rely on if we were running late or I needed coverage for something that popped up. It was really going to those folks, and so I had a particular affection for the caregivers in our lives, and that's really what sort of got me interested in understanding more of the childcare industry.
That's such a great story, and I think it can hit home with a lot of folks that are maybe, watching this show,
Yeah,
hopefully, and definitely resonates with me as a transplant to Pennsylvania,
yeah,
to Philadelphia, and then to Pittsburgh, and a single mother. We rely on this ecosystem of folks around us to help us to do what we have to do.
yeah, yeah.
So you talked a little bit about how long you've worked in early child care education. Um, what makes you so passionate about this field?
Yeah. I love that we're doing this show right after a meeting that I just had because it really like exemplifies why I love the work and why I do what I do. Um, I am in the work for the women that are caring for young children. So I know you know this, maybe your listeners know this. Probably about 96% of all early learning experiences, early childhood experiences, childcare experiences are led and provided by women. So it is a women-led field. It is also has a high number of women of color who lead the work in this industry, and so I know that what they are brain builders. You know, they because I recognize that probably later than I should have, but I recognize that as a parent, as a mom, that really what we're doing is we're building healthy soon to be adults, right? Like at some point they're going to be adults. And so, and it starts with building their brains. And so I recognize very much the value of what they're doing and the long-term impact that they have. But what I understand about the way in which the system and society views the work, and especially, based on sort of the history of how caregiving came into formation, we don't value the individuals, and that is, we don't value women, and we don't value women of color in their work in caregiving. And so I am in the work because I want to change that for, I want to change that for children. I want to change that for the women who care for children. And I really want to change that for our society. I think it's a significant loss for sort of how we can be in the world by not recognizing that value and their value specifically.
You talk about the history of how childcare or the care economy came to be, and it's very much linked with the past history of the United States
Yep,
and enslavement. And
yep,
so I think about I've got to do this right. My great great grandmother was a
okay.
wet nurse. And so she, in order to make money so that she could go to teachers college at the time,
Mm,
she was breastfeeding other mothers' babies. And those mothers were they were white women.
yep,
So that speaks a little bit to the history of the care economy.
yep.
So, trying together, such an interesting title. Can you tell me a little bit about what does trying together mean?
Yeah, I love that question. So we used to be called, so let me say a little bit about our organization. We've been around since 1963. And we were volunteer run, and it was because local early childhood educators were looking to create a professional home for themselves. It was sort of the beginning of when caregiving became formalized. And it was because there was a recognition that women were needing actually structured care because they were going into the workforce, and that was a shift in which the family structure sort of had occurred for so many decades. So from like 1963 to 2000, well, 1963 to 1983, we were the Pittsburgh Area Preschool Association, PAPA. And then in 1983, we affiliated with the National Association for the Education of Young Children, and we adopted the name the Pittsburgh Association for the Education of Young Children. So some of your viewers may know us as PACey because we've been around for such a long time. And then around 2016, 17, the National Association was going through its own sort of restructuring. And they, as a result, were coming up with sort of new naming conventions for their affiliates. And one of the things we had always struggled with was just that the name was, PACey at length was a long name. And often people would sort of forget the length of the name. They would forget one of the words in it, or they wouldn't know how to spell the acronym. And so we really just felt like it didn't convey who we were and the women that do the work, and really sort of how they thought about what it is that they do every day. And so we embarked on a conversation with the early care and education community to say, tell us more about how you see yourselves, how you see the work that you do. So we had this, went through this whole sort of communications process. And along the way, my communications director had run across an article that Fred Rogers had written in the Post Gazette. And I think it was actually in 1983. And in his article, he wrote, "We need to remember that children are trying to understand their feelings and their world, trying to please the people they love, trying to grow. When grown-ups and children are trying together, just about anything can be possible." And it was the conversations with the caregivers, with the early childhood educators, that when she came across the quote, she was like, wow, this really captures what we're hearing from them. And so, through that sort of messaging and communications process, we just sort of posited back to the folks that were involved, does this quote reflect how you see it? They were like, yes, that's it. And so we just pulled out those two words, trying together, and said, yeah, this captures what it is we're doing every day. And what I love about trying, the verb trying, is it's about exerting effort. And I think that, sometimes we'll talk about trying times, and it can be seen in sort of a negative connotation, the word trying. what is first and foremost in the definition is it's about exerting effort, or sort of putting forth your best foot, I think is another way that they describe it. And I think about, yeah, that is what the by and large women in our field do, is every day they are putting forth effort, they're putting their best foot forward on behalf of young children and families that they care for. So that's where the name came from. And I couldn't love it more, because it really feels like it captures who we are and the folks that we work with. So yeah, that's a little bit about our name.
We were talking a little bit before this, and I know that the spring is your really, really busy month,
Yeah.
and it really kicks off in April. So talk a little bit about what's been going on in your sphere.
Yeah. So April is month of the young child, and it was actually established originally with the week of the young child, which is through the National Association that I mentioned earlier. And that week is really meant to elevate and highlight the work of early childhood. So it's meant to bring about attention, right? Well, here in Pennsylvania, because we always do things bigger in Pennsylvania, we said, well, a week is not enough. It's got to be a full month. So, and that really came out of our region, Southwest PA, and our work many years ago with, through Pacey, when we were sort of our older name. And so we really utilize April as the month to bring recognition and acknowledgement for young children, their families, and really the efforts of the caregivers in young children's life. And so for us, that's very specifically early childhood educators. So April always sort of kicks off with a bang, and we have several events through the month. Our big event, which we have had probably for 20 plus years, is called the annual Early Educator Celebration Dinner. And really the job of folks that come to that dinner is to just be loved on. We don't want to ask anything of them. We're not asking them to engage in professional development. We're not asking them to care for young children. We're just saying, come as you are, whether that's like a hoodie and sweatpants because you just stepped out of the preschool classroom, or whether that's because you feel like dressing up. Just come as you are and let us love on you. Let us tell you how much we appreciate you, how much we see your work and the effort that you put forward. And we want to give you good food to eat. We want to let you have cocktails and feel sort of fancy if you want to feel fancy. We want you to get with your colleagues and take pictures and selfies. We want you to get free stuff. So we want to give you raffle baskets and swag bags and books that might be enriching. And we just want to celebrate you. That's all, like nothing asked of you. And so that event for the past 3 years has actually been at Acrisure Stadium. We have sold out each year. We're at about 800 folks attending, which is the maximum that Acrisure can take. And we had, I think, 150 people on the wait list this year. So it broke our hearts that we couldn't get everyone in, because everybody deserves to be acknowledged. But it's really like that event that to me just feels like it is who we are and what we hope caregivers feel. Our North Star sort of for our organization vision statement is that all caregivers feel valued. And I certainly know as a mom, when I feel good about myself, when I feel good about, my day, how I'm feeling physically, mentally, emotionally, that always translates over to my kids. It shows up, I show up better as a parent. And so I just think about, well, wow, if sort of society understood the value of caregivers, imagine what they can bring and do on behalf of young children when you feel good about yourself. So it's really a night to like make sure they feel buoyed for their work. So that's like, so it's sort of April's a really busy season. There's lots of other sort of smaller events through the season. But it also begins for Pennsylvania, really like the beginnings of budget season for us. Mm-hmm. So even though the governor's budget proposal comes out in February, I think like some of that negotiation, the hearings, all of that work starts in April. And it kicks off really like all the visits to Harrisburg to meet with our legislators in the Harrisburg office. Of course, all of the visits here in their home districts. And really what we're trying to do is say, hey, as you are sort of working through the state budget, we ask that you center children, the families, and the early educators in their lives. And so we were really excited that this year the governor proposed $55 million in his budget to help improve and ensure that we have retainment of early childhood educators. Our workforce is really stretched thin. It's really been sort of constrained ever since COVID. And one of the things that we're struggling with is wages. And so the governor said, I want to help solve for that. So right now, May 30th, we are very busy doing all of the kinds of events to help legislators make the best decisions they can about their budget priorities. And that is really lifting up the line items that affect young children and their caregivers. So that makes, that April, May, June season really busy for us here locally.
I like to say, if you don't count it, it doesn't count.
That's
So
right.
we can talk so much about how we care about families and we care about women. And there's a lot of talk right now about how the birth rate is
Mhm.
very low, and that's a national thing, and it's also worldwide.
Mhm.
So, I think if what we want is to invest in families, then we need to actually invest in families and invest in women. So,
Yeah.
so glad that you're at the front lines doing that work. How does access to high quality, affordable childcare intersect with racial, gender, and economic equity?
Here's the thing I know. So I have the opportunity to sit at a lot of workforce tables regionally, right? So there's a lot of sort of industry groups that come together around specific workforces. And they always, when you talk to employers and they say, what's your challenge around your workforce? Employers will say, well, there's two things I hear: transportation and childcare. And so, to your point, one of the biggest sort of barriers to economic development, to economic mobility for women and for families is childcare. You can't go to work if your children don't have a safe place, a safe and enriching place to be cared for. So we are intimately tied to everybody else's workforce. I like to say we're the workforce behind the workforce. So if you want to solve for a particular industry's workforce, you've got to solve for the childcare workforce. That's like just a no-brainer, right? The way in which our system is regulated, which I think we can all agree is good, is that you can only care for so many children per adults, right? We don't want an individual to have to care for 22-year-olds, right? That's really difficult. I know. Every time I look at a parent with a set of twins, I'm like, how in the world are you doing it with two, right? So we know that in order to sort of do that brain building, make sure children are safe and getting the responsive care that they need, you have to be thoughtful about the number of children that a person is caring for. Well, that means that, when you don't have the workforce that you need in childcare, you can't care for as many children as the demand is showing, right? So you need supply of the workforce to meet the demand of the other workforces. They're intricately connected. And so what we know is, again, if we don't have enough folks working in the early care and education industry, then we can't get all those other parents working. So their economic mobility is completely tied to the economic opportunities that exist in the childcare workforce. So here's the rub, here's the problem. The childcare workforce going into COVID, the average wage in Pennsylvania was something like $9 and maybe $9.69. Okay. That was what, 2020. My older daughter, who just turned 21, was 16 at the time, and she went and got her first job at Chipotle. She walked out of there. I said, hey, what are you making? She said, oh, should I have asked that question? Yep. God bless our teenagers, right? Yep.
They have to learn.
Yeah. And so, of course, in her follow-up conversation, she learned she was making $14.25. I love my daughter. Of course, she is worth $14.25 at Chipotle. But then I kept thinking about all of the women that are caring for young children who are making $9 an hour. And I said, something is off. Something is off. So it's only been through COVID, so flash forward to now, that we've been able to get the wages up. And that's only because inflation went up and some of the investments went up. And so we've been able to raise the wage to about $15 an hour. But that still is not competitive with, places like Sheetz and Target and your grocery stores and other service, Aldi's and other service industries who are paying north of $15 an hour. So what happens is if you're choosing between caring for young children, knowing that that is physically and emotionally laborious, or working in a retail store or a fast food that maybe doesn't have that same pull on you, right? You can sort of go home at the end of the day and you put it off to the side versus working in childcare where you're sort of constantly thinking about the children that you're caring for or their families that are struggling. You're going to choose the one that's paying more and that maybe has less of a drain on you emotionally and physically. So it's very much a challenge in terms of our collective economic mobility if we don't solve for the economics of childcare and the wages that they make. That's how it's sort of all interconnected.
I love that you pulled that all together and connected those dots for our listeners if those dots were not connected for them. And it just makes me think, as we started this conversation, centering women, women are the ones that are behind that economy.
Yes.
And really, it is women of color. And
Yeah.
so they are working for suppressed wages. And then
Yep.
they're coming home to their own families and having to give to their own families. And so the work never ends and the drain never ends. So I'm
Yeah.
just so appreciative. Yes.
Yeah. I'll just say how you described it is so well. It is that women are subsidizing on they're the ones subsidizing everybody else's their costs. So women are taking it on their backs. They're the ones making less so that other people can do okay. Yeah.
Yes.
We got to change that. We got to change that.
We have to change that. We have to change that. And one more plug while we're talking about, the economics of caregiving and how it impacts women. I often think about, and we talk about here at the Women and Girls Foundation, when you have to step away from the workforce, you are not able to add to your retirement. So
Hmm.
when we spend all of our childbearing lives giving so much and supporting the rest of the economy, when we get to our retirement age, 65 and above, we're retiring with way less access to capital and to wealth. And women live longer. So this is a problem that, as you say, really needs to be solved for because it's going to continue to affect us
Yeah.
generations and generations down the line. I really can't wait to have you back on to talk more about these issues. But before we wrap things up today, is there anything else that you want to share about the work, about yourself, or about trying together?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say this. So, to your listeners, if you utilize childcare, if you know of someone that uses childcare, just like tell the caregivers in your life that you appreciate them. Like it's it feels really good to feel acknowledged. And I think those little steps go a long way. So that's the little thing I think that your listeners can do. The maybe a little bit larger thing that they can do is call their legislator. And all they have to say is, we want you to center the governor's proposed budget of 55 million for the child care recruitment and retention initiative. So that's all you have to say. You can even send them an email, but like, hey, I'm one of your constituents. It's really important to me. Can we please center and make sure included in the budget is the governor's proposed budget of 55 million for early childhood? That's all you have to do. And that makes a big difference because what they want to do is be responsive to their constituents. And so if they hear from you saying it's important to you, they're more likely to do it. So that's like a really simple thing they can do. And now's a really good time because it's when all the negotiations are happening.
I'm so glad you ended with contacting our local representatives and our legislators, because that's also central to what we teach our young people at the Women and Girls Foundation, and the
Yeah,
message that we share with the world, which is stay engaged, stay educated, and use your civic power and your voice.
yeah.
Right. So, how can people find out more about Trying Together?
Yeah. First thing you can do is just go to our website. So it's tryingtogether.org, but we're also on LinkedIn, we're on Facebook, we're on Instagram. You can learn more about our work in any of those social media channels. But definitely check out our website. You can always shoot me an email. I'm Cara at tryingtogether.org, Cara with a C. But yeah, I look forward to hearing from any of your folks that are interested in learning more about our work. Our work is tied to your work, Camilla. So if we win, you win, and if you win, we win. So the better, the more we partner together, and the more we work together and lift each other up, the better we'll all be.
And
Yeah,
if women are lifted up, actually everyone wins.
everybody wins. Yeah,
That is the best outcome possible. So thank you for joining me. And for the rest of the folks that are watching, you can always find out more about the Women and Girls Foundation at WGFPA.org, and stay connected with us on LinkedIn. And I'll see you next time.